I grew up in the 80s. We watched it in college in the early 80s. And I knew I wanted to be a Kirk or a Spock or a McCoy. I did not want to be that specialist that went down to the planet and never came back. So I right away had a vision of how do I become one of those permanent players or one of those people that is important. And I didn't realize then that I was really aspiring to the C-suite.
Hands up if you've ever had to work with an annoying colleague or an annoying boss, or had to manage someone that really irritated you. It's pretty common, it's unavoidable, it's human nature. But these personality clashes can be a serious problem for a business, impacting teamwork and cohesion, affecting the mindset and the performance of people in your team. And for that reason, very quickly become an issue that you, as the leader, will want and need to resolve. My guest today is Ilene Marcus, and she literally wrote the book on managing annoying people. She's also the leader behind Aligned Workspace, a company helping leaders and founders level up their innovation and talent strategy. Today, we'll be hearing all about Ilene's experience, her journey so far, and what you can, can't, should, and shouldn't be doing about those annoying workplace behaviors, whether they're yours or someone else's. And don't forget to visit www.leadernotaboss and sign up for my newsletter that goes alongside this podcast, and get your invite to join my Integrity Leaders online community for new managers just like you.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Ilene, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's great to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
So happy to be here.
Good, pleased to hear it. Well, we're going to kick off then by handing over to you, as I do with nearly every guest all the time, to introduce yourself to the listeners, tell everyone a bit about your experience, your background, and what you do today.
I'm Ilene Marcus. I am the author of Managing Annoying People, and I run a company called Aligned Workplace because in my experience, mission, vision, staff, resources, all have to be aligned, as well as our energy for anything to happen. And my story is one that I'm going to start with Star Trek, actually, which I know is a fan of the show. I grew up in the 80s. We watched it in college in the early 80s. And I knew I wanted to be a Kirk or a Spock or a McCoy. I did not want to be that specialist that went down to the planet and never came back. So I right away had a vision of how do I become one of those permanent players or one of those people that is important. And I didn't realize then that I was really aspiring to the C-suite. But I grew up in Long Island, in New York, when people, a lot of our parents and, it was 2 family houses and keeping up with the Joneses, our parents commuted into the city and we had a lot of free time. And I was on my own a lot. And I learned that community and belonging and financial independence could drive me. And that really is how I got into my career. I really became a joiner. I went to college and I took a semester abroad, as many do. And I found these social workers in France, in the countryside, walking around delivering wine and bread to clients. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. Talk to people and build community. When I went to Columbia for grad school, I started in the business program, and I very quickly learned that that was not for me. I stayed in the MPA, Master of Public Administration, but I really went for the social work program. So I always had those 2 things, social work, business, social work administration. But the bottom line is somehow, because I knew I wanted to be a Kirk, I wanted to explore new things, I always ended in new adventures. So I always had jobs after my first job, which was a budget job. So I'm a data numbers geek. My first job was putting together a $2.1 billion home care budget for the city of New York, and this is before Excel. So we were doing SPSS, and it was before, we were doing econometric models and auto regressions by hand. So I really love the numbers and the data, but I learned that really has to be balanced with the intuition and the people. So I have that social work side and that administrative analytical side, which has really fueled my career. And I went on to be a leader. I implemented one of the largest technology programs to date. It was an AFIS, automated finger imaging system, where you would put your finger down the scan, for 1.2 million people in 1994. So that was a huge time when technology still wasn't even really being used that widely. Most people didn't even have cell phones then. They were just coming out. And I've always been building the plane while we fly it. So getting to the next job where we're integrating a new technology, I've always been in those high stakes atmospheres. And that's what I do now. I work with entrepreneurs to help them build the plane while they're flying it, to put together a team that's going to hold what they're trying to build and actually get them to the destination.
It's a very worrying analogy, that one, building the plane while you're flying it.
We're going to get into it, but I use that one on purpose because 65% of all startups fail due to team issues. So it really is a big worry about, are you building something that can land? Are you putting together the right parts that can really make it to the finish line?
Fair enough. Yeah, I was trying to think of a less worrisome analogy and I couldn't think of one. I mean, you can't build a boat when you're sailing either because it will sit. Yeah. I'll have to come back to that one.
The other one I used that worked for most of my career was, changing a tire on a car going 60 miles an hour. So we were changing, organizations from paper and rotary phones to more technology and computers. So that one is less scary, but it's still kind of scary. Because when you start to talk about technology, new processes, new ways, especially of getting large organizations to act that way, it actually is scary if you think about it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I guess being at the forefront of the technology in that way as well. And I mean, things like fingerprint scanners back then before the cell phone, even, that's pretty cutting edge stuff. That must have been quite exciting.
Quite exciting. I learned a lot of things I didn't know about minutia points and fingers and transmission, right? Then there weren't even really, we had to install T3 lines then to even get the technology to work. They weren't commonplace.
Wow. And as for SPSS, I recognize it enough from, I think, maybe one term when I was at college where we had to do it for a project, and that was enough to know I never wanted to use it ever again for the rest of my life.
It's funny, as you get older, you start to, at first you'd say, oh, wow, look at these young kids or these young technologies, or I don't know how they do it. And then you start to realize, oh, there's wisdom in what I've learned and where I've been. And there's a reason I can see things strategically or see things that the people I coach or train or speak to have not seen because they don't really know it from the ground up. And by sometimes understanding the real basics of where it came from and why we do that, it changes their whole perspective.
Absolutely. Let's talk a bit about your book and this idea around annoying people. So what is it that first got you talking about that and thinking about it? And also, is it people who are annoying or the act of annoying other people, or is it both?
It is all of it, right? People always ask me, Ilene, really, what's the probability that someone's going to annoy me? And this is along the lines of, we're in an interview. What's the probability that my company is going to succeed? What's the probability that this technology will work? What's the probability I'll get into that accelerator? Those kind of questions. I say the only one I can answer with 100% certainty is annoying. Someone is going to annoy you today. Someone you love, someone you work with, someone on the line for coffee, someone driving in front of you. Someone is going to annoy you. I really didn't understand it for a lot of years, as I think a lot of people don't, because even though we face annoying situations, we don't think about them in terms of business. We don't think about annoying in business. We think about the goal, the metric. We think about sometimes if there are illegal people doing immoral things, but we don't think of people that just get under our skin if they're producing. And yet, annoying is a real showstopper, right? Saps your energy. So I really started to see it when I started coaching. But I go back to that point where I created my first team. The automated finger engine was one part of it. Very high public, very highly looked at project. And I inherited some of my team and gained them. The people that I hired, I made mini-me's. They were just like me. I vibrate at a high level. I talk fast. I get it done, but I'm a lot to handle. So I had a room full of those people and I saw it coming at me. And half the time I loved them. It was all about, can I have this extra resource? I have an idea. Can you show up to this with me? They weren't, lobbing me bad things, but it was coming at me so fast and I was overwhelmed and I was constantly annoyed at them, even though I liked them. So that, I say the best superstars are the most annoying usually.
Interesting take on it. Yeah. I from some of the things you were saying earlier as well, I think it's that interpersonal dynamic, isn't it? Which can absolutely make or break a team. And whether or not you're going to be annoyed by someone in the team, either as a member of the team or as the leader of the team, or, there's a risk there, isn't there, in how it's handled. And I think part of that has to come back to the leader in terms of how they manage it, not just for their own annoyance, but for the annoyance between people that they're managing. Any tips for how to handle that?
Well, first of all, it always comes back to the leader. They set the tone, right? If they, I say annoyance happens in three ways. Some people are just annoying. I think about this one person that used to come in with their coffee, slurping it every morning. Yeah. And it was just annoying. Or I always had, being a data geek and people knew that, would come in with piles and piles of reports and handing out stuff that everybody was getting sidetracked. Some people are just annoying. Some people are what I call reminders. They remind you of someone that upset you, a teacher, your brother, your mother, whoever it is, that just triggers you. And I don't think trigger is a bad word. I think trigger is a clue. So that's a clue for managing yourself. They trigger you. And then there are people who are mirrors. And I think mirrors are the hardest for us to see and accept, especially as you move up in the work, because mirrors are people that remind you of you, and they usually have something you don't. And you want it, so you act out, right? They're reflecting back to you, but maybe they're already the CEO, or they have the office you want, or they have the client you like, or they have an idea you didn't come up with. And you're like, oh, I was right there. So we come out with annoying. So annoying is always on us. Always on us, and always on the leader to set that dynamic. Because if you have one of those annoying people or one of those interactions, if the other team members are laughing about it or letting it go or letting you be that way, if the leader is complacent about it or involved in it, at first he's like, oh yeah, I get along with my team so well. But eventually the entire team will turn on you because they will realize that could be me tomorrow. That could be me tomorrow. So you undermine the very thing that is so critical in teams, the trust. So it's really important for all of us to manage our own behavior because, I love that saying, what is above is below. So above, so below. What's on the inside is on the outside. Everywhere you go, there you are. So you think you're showing up, and sometimes it's not even about the work, right? It could be about something at home. It could be, I have a big dog. He's a big PIA. You know what we call PIA? Pain in the assets. He's a big pain in the assets, right? I love him. But, sometimes I can't get him in when I have to leave and I can't leave him in the yard and I'll be running late. So I'm, of course, there's a slow person in front of me. I'm pressing on the gas and I'm looking, I drive to where I'm going. And when I get to the office, instead of being in that Zen calm and leading the meeting, I'm already ramped up. And when I'm ramped up, everyone else is getting ramped up. It actually has nothing even to do with the work, but the tone I set sets off everyone. And then all of our days are going to cascade down.
It's a good point, definitely. And you've touched on there at the end one of the reasons why I'm a massive supporter of remote working, because if you're not on the commute, you can't get annoyed by the traffic.
You say that, but I have coached so many people. My Zoom wouldn't go on. It was spinning. It had to upgrade. I was on, think about Zoom. We can't double book. Sometimes on your phone, but there are other things that happen. I mean, from the manager side, hell are you late for a Zoom meeting? What is your excuse for that? There was no traffic. So I think, you're right. There are pros and cons to every different situation. But the point of that one is people can show up annoyed before the work even starts. That might have nothing to do with the work. Often it does have to do with the work. We know about team responsibilities and, people, all the things that happen. But did I answer your question more importantly, David?
I think so, yeah. No, I do agree with you. I was being slightly facetious before, but I think, yes. Yeah, I've yet to have a Zoom update that's caused me to be an hour late, though, whereas traffic would do that routinely.
Me neither. There's a famous song by the Bangles. You're probably too young. It was like, even if I had a plane, I couldn't get to work on time. If you're going to start out that late, it's never going to happen. Defy the laws of nature.
Yeah.
If you could be beamed there, it would change everything.
Oh, absolutely. Back to Star Trek again. Yeah, definitely. But then again, I think time is one of those things. Like, it almost doesn't matter how much of it you have, you'll always find a way of filling it. And some people would always find a way of being late.
Yes. And I think, I also always say that time is one of those things you can never make more of. So you can't get it back. And when annoying situations or people zap your energy, that's the risk of really annoying. It's not just that interaction. It's that you lose that time of focus, of driving your priorities, of what you would have spent on something else.
Indeed. And it can often lead to further interpersonal problems as well. If the annoying conversation with the annoying person then puts you in the wrong state of mind for the conversation with the next person, and so on and so on, and it can just derail an entire day so easily.
Yep, domino.
So another question for you then. How do you, because a lot of these kind of human interactions here the lines can get blurred sometimes. So how can you distinguish between a genuine, just someone's a bit annoying that day, or they've got a habit that you don't like, something like that, versus a deeper problem that the leader actually needs to do something about?
Right. So the first thing is to know yourself, to know your triggers, to know that you're triggered. So we all joke, awareness is the first step, but it truly is the first step. So when you get annoyed, there's actually a physiological response. Annoyance does the same thing that fear or anger does. So your amygdala, which actually makes decisions, is triggered. And your amygdala doesn't make decisions. It is in charge of decision making, but it processes emotions. So right away at that first trigger, you're going fight or flight. And you're not thinking, oh, they do this every day, let me get used to it. You're reacting. So the first thing is to understand it's a physiological response. Your amygdala is going to go into fight or flight. Once the amygdala gets triggered, the adrenal glands react, and they really are the response to stress, where your blood pressure goes up, your temperature goes up. You know what? I'm forgetting about the frontal lobe. What's wrong with me today? The amygdala, the frontal lobe, which is about expression. So when the frontal lobe gets involved, you're losing your executive thought. So if you don't realize right away when I'm fighting or I'm fleeing, I'll get into that. You're fighting. I say there are 4 F's. I fight, I flee, I freeze. If you don't know your response, you're never going to do the right F, which is focus. So the first thing is to know your response. If you don't see the response, all of a sudden, you can't make a decision. Do I want to stay? Do I want to go? Do I want to yell at this guy? That's the second clue. And the third clue, you're gone, is when the adrenal glands get in, and already your temperature's up, your blood pressure's up, and you're acting crazy. They already know you're crazy. We talked about those people running into the meetings an hour late. So the first thing is to actually know your trigger. Know when you're going to get upset. And it's that pregnant pause. I like to change the dynamic by saying, smile like you have a secret. When you feel yourself going like this, smile, changes everything. I ask people to think about Mona Lisa. We don't really know what's going on there. We don't know what's going on from the waist down. It's a little like Zoom. We have no idea, but we do know that she's got this cryptic little smile, that she is both calm and she knows something we might not. And that's, I think, a really good technique, especially if you're the leader. I'm annoyed, but I'm going to make you think I know something I don't. So everybody else stands up and changes. And I see it in you right now. When you smile, it does. It changes your posture. It changes everything. If you can't smile, take a deep breath. Some people, tap on their arm to get them out of it. But the first thing is awareness. And once you see that and you know your response, and often it's complicated. I am a fighter and then I run, because I don't want to deal with it. A lot of people fight and then they freeze. It's usually a 1-2. Us humans are very complicated. Once you know your response, you can actively work against it. I always think about, I don't know if you guys are Seinfeld fans, but I always think about that Seinfeld episode. I really wasn't either. But there was one episode where he said, I'm going to do the opposite. Instead of ordering chicken salad on toast, I'm going to order tuna on rye. I don't know how that's the opposite, but do the opposite, right? So bad example, but the idea that I know I'm getting pissed off, let me go to the bathroom, let me write a note, let me, do something else, let me leave the meeting. Because the original question you asked, how did I know I was annoying? I had a big situation where I was in a very important meeting and I whispered something under my breath because I was annoyed. And everyone heard it. Everyone heard it. And that changed their entire feeling about me. And it was a budget meeting in front of a mayor and several other commissioners about how they were going to treat me. So that's the risk if you don't do it. It's your brand. It's who you are. It's how people come to know you. So taking that moment to really, whether you like it or not, and getting to know yourself, because it's you're trying to manage. You really don't have control over other people. You can lead them. You can model for them. You can show them, but it's really yourself you have to manage.
Yes. I do like the fight or flight thing. I mean, that's fairly well known. And it's only in the last few years, I think, that the freeze has been added to that, or at least I've only been hearing about it for that long. But it made me think back, because I always had a bit of a thing with the fight or flight, and trying to think back to when I've been in stressful situations, and I don't think I'd done either very often. But freeze, I've done that loads of times.
I think of that deer in the headlight. But I also, it's funny because I've used freeze for like 10 years now, but I also think about it in terms of it being complicated. So when someone's just purely annoying, you might fight because it's so obvious, right? Why are they chewing their cereal so loud, or why are they always showing up so late? So you might go to fight. But if your boss has a way of pushing your buttons because they say, didn't you get that memo? Which you never get. Or, the priorities has shifted. We're not on that. Something you just spent 30 hours working on. You might have a different response. So I take people through exercises and role playing of what is your response, because people really don't know themselves. And as I said, annoyance is something we don't really think about. We're like, oh, that's just annoying. We think we've said it and it's gone, but it's not, because that physiological response has already had it start in the body, and you have to stop that loop.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Especially when adrenaline gets involved. And I think there's a context element to it as well. And I think there's probably tolerances and thresholds which will be different for every person. And I mean, I don't want to talk about myself too much, but I like to think I have a pretty high tolerance for that sort of thing, or at least I used to. And it took several years of consistent drumming away and stress and things before I did finally have that. I don't want to say I snapped. I didn't go postal or anything, but there was a moment where anger took over, let's say.
Yes. And that's why I say triggers. Most people say, oh, trigger. They even see it as a trigger to their head, or a trigger is a bad thing. It starts a reaction. A trigger is information. A trigger is an input to you that you have to elicit a response or a different response. And I do use, I say I work with leaders, but it's usually pretty quickly they invite me into their team meeting, and I do videotape them. And it's really, well, now, just on the phone, but now it's with everybody's approval. But it's really interesting how the first 10 minutes, everybody's really on their best behavior. And then they forget that I'm there, and you can see it. And when you play that back for people, it's a real tool. So I even say to people sometimes when you're on Zoom, just tape yourself. Listen to how you're coming off to other people. Listen to the tone in your voice. If someone else was in the next room and they heard you, they would say, "Oh, why are you being so mean to that person?" And sometimes people need to be spoken to like that. But if that's your general tone, so there are other tools about listening, role-playing, videotaping, and really, the biggest tool after once you start to acknowledge it, I say, live in a laboratory. Live in a laboratory. Show up to meetings to learn. Say, I'm going to be different today. Today, I'm the fly on the wall. Even if you're the leader, I sometimes have them say, have someone else run the meeting. See how your team interacts. Let's look at where you want to jump in. What gets your blood pressure up? What you're going to go back to your office, or, when they get off the meeting, what you're going to be like about. Let's dig into when those things happen. So there are many ways to identify the triggers. But as you just said, once people can see their own behavior, boy, I have a phrase that says, you'll laugh, you'll cringe, you'll change, because that's what happens. Once we see our cringeworthy behavior, we don't want to do it again.
Definitely. Yeah. And there is a lot to be said, I think, for that external, that third party perspective, because best will in the world, most of us live inside our own heads. We have our own perception of ourselves. And sometimes it does take that other person or that recording to just kind of shock you out of it, to make you realize, oh, okay, I didn't realize that's how
I didn't realize in this budget meeting that I even said anything under my breath. I'm like, what? Why is everybody looking at me? I didn't even realize. I said something nasty to the police commissioner. You never say anything nasty to the police commissioner, but I did. It wasn't nasty.
We obviously got away with it.
It was more like, how come the welfare department never gets what we need and they have all the cars they want?
Could have been worse. It could have been worse. Yeah.
There's an upside to that story. I say that was the moment that, I don't know if you have them in England, but in the US, we have these phantom police cars all over. Have you seen them? They're parked cars that are empty.
No.
2 weeks later, the police commissioner walks in, because I was complaining about that, the welfare department had saved all this money implementing all these changes. And the police department, every time they ask for a request, and I love the police and I support the police and they really do deserve it. But we also, my staff needed support. And I was complaining because, we had a lot of empty desks and weren't getting backfilled jobs or what we wanted. And they kept on getting resources. And I was like, no, about some empty police cars instead of empty desks. And 2 weeks later, the phantom movement. Now, obviously, that had been in the works. It had worked in Miami. There was research on it. But it's just funny of the timing. And that's a pretty big movement in the U.S., that there are empty police cars that actually slow down into freight traffic. So I say it all goes back to when I yelled at the police commissioner, why don't you have empty cars?
Oh, wow. Interesting. So they just park them near the roads?
Yeah, you can look them up. At the entrance to bridges, at different cross stations. Especially, I live very rurally, so they have more cars sometimes than staff on. So they'll put it at a busy intersection or in a school parking lot, and on the highway. Yeah, interesting. Quite a technique.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent with it, but yeah, I mean, so over here, they probably wouldn't bother doing that because we have a speed camera culture. So, and depending on who you listen to over here as well, there's probably more police cars than there are police personnel already. So,
put them to use. Park them somewhere.
Well, maybe I'll put it in a suggestion box or something. Yeah.
Anyway, sidetrack. I love sidetrack.
No, it's interesting though. I like hearing those kind of national and cultural differences. It's always interesting. So, not to labour the point, because I think we've probably covered this already, but what do you think are the main reasons why, particularly when we're talking about annoying behaviours, that managing them is important?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when you don't manage it, you lose time. You zap energy. That's very clear. You get away from your driving priorities. You forget what you were doing. I think that the whole idea of workplace, especially now with some real heady issues and hard implementations, is it reduces stress. If you don't manage when you're annoyed at the people instead of the work, right? Principles over personalities. It's really about what you're trying to achieve, not what the people are doing. So it's less, you'll have less stress. I think everybody agrees if people are getting along better, there are better outcomes. You're a better team contributor. You can listen to people better. You're more open to receiving ideas. And we know that ideas are really the currency now that matters. What is the idea? What's the solution? How can we fix this? How can we move this forward? So when you're stuck and annoying, you're kind of in a loop. Right? You just can't get out of it, and you can't get over, as I say, you can't jump the groove or jump the lip. So how do you jumpstart that forward? So the idea is not to get into that groove where, oh, yeah, my time, my energy, this person, and then you can't really see the work. So I think those are the risk factors. As the team leader, definitely losing influence, losing access to resources, definitely losing, the power of a team. Teams are meant that everyone has a role and we're greater each, together than we are individually. But when you sideline certain people with your behaviors or their behaviors, or you let them be annoyed at others, you lose why you're all working together. Even on a team that doesn't necessarily depend on each other, like a sales team, we might all be responsible for our own whatever it is, our own clients, our own process, but still it's that group together where we're not part of something that we feel is elevating us, where we feel seen and heard and valued. And those are really the main drivers of success, feeling seen and valued and heard. And when we get annoyed and we get annoyed at others or we act out on it, we lose those drivers and then the motivation decreases.
And where do you fall on the conversation about, is it better to air the grievances and then put it to bed, or is that going to cause more problems and potentially destructive outcomes?
Yeah, so we're talking about in the workplace. I'm going to be very clear. I'm not talking about at home with your spouse, with your mother-in-law, any of that. We're talking about the workplace. And in the workplace, there is a hierarchy. And I like to say one person is the leader and one person is not. So the first thing you have to do is look at that grievance and say, is it a real grievance, or is it, I got a call from someone yesterday who was offered a new job and they weren't going to take it because I don't know if the story is applicable, but it's in my head. They weren't going to take the new job because it's a remote job, and they said, they won't pay for me to go to the headquarters. And I said, oh, how do you know that? It's early on. They don't know you yet. You don't know them. He said, well, my niece lives right there. And I told them they didn't even have to pay. I would come into headquarters because my niece lives right there, but I'd like to come into headquarters. And they said, we have no money in the budget. We're not bringing you to headquarters. Please put that to bed. And they were not going to take the job. And I was like, you started it. I forgot why this was my good example, but you started it. You said, I'm going to come because my niece lives there. And they're thinking she's getting free trips to her niece. Why am I using this example? We don't always know why people ahead on top of us are thinking something. She's like, I told them I would pay for it. And they're thinking that's what you say, but all of a sudden there's going to be more and more trips so you can visit your niece on their dime. Oh, I didn't think about that. No, you didn't. So it's that, I have one great graphic it's about learning that 360 view of not what other people do, but what they worry about, right? So you might be worried about taking this project or implementing. They're worried about risks, supply chain, environment, clients. So to really think about so that's the first thing about a grievance. Is it personal to you? Are you not seeing the whole picture? Why might they say, no, we're not paying, right off, we're not paying for you to come to headquarters. You started it. You opened your big mouth. Really, I thought, inappropriate thing to say in a salary negotiation. So that's the first step. Think about what the person on top of you is thinking about and why that might be a policy, why it might be the way that things need to be done. I was actually at the Harvard Art Museum a few weeks ago, and in Boston, and they like you to check in. And my friend's like, why do we have to check in? It's free. I'm like, because they want to keep it free, and they want to know where we're visiting from. You're from Florida, or I'm from here, right? They want to so you have to think about why they're doing those things that you don't like. So that's the first thing, the grievance. The second thing is absolutely, whether you're the boss, whether you're the person, you air it. But you do it with just the facts, ma'am, right? When you do this, this happens. When you did this, this is what happened to me. So you don't raise it from you, me, this, against. You raise it from, I want to talk about this because I'm having trouble processing it. You keep it in those I statements we've all heard, but the facts. You keep on, I am not receiving the emails that you keep, you've told me you've sent. Do you want to go through my inbox? Do you want to look at the data? But that's very frustrating to me. So how can we make sure I'm getting it? Can I work? That's a bad example, but so like that. So you really want to talk about it. If you feel you did not get resolution, if you work in a large organization, and I work with a lot of startups, and HR is not founded yet, and HR is really about benefits, compensation, stock share. They're not really on that yet. I really suggest that you talk to a peer or a colleague and get your head, or a coach, because a lot of times the things we hold on to. Now, if your boss or someone in your office is doing something illegal, immoral, or unethical, absolutely you should report it to the board, whoever, but you should make sure that those things really are immoral, illegal, whatever they are. But if it is just between the two of you, or it's just something that keeps on getting you upset, or it's a place, that you just don't like it, if it's a culture problem, then think about your fit. Think about, do you belong there? Even if you love the mission, if you don't love the boss, you don't love the culture, this is a buyer's world right now. I'm not telling you to leave your employer, but if you're not happy, you're not bringing your A game. So yes, deal with it as soon as you can, appropriately. Think about why they might be doing that. And I will say that even when you can understand their reason for it, you can say, but it has this impact on me. Is there a way to ameliorate that? Can we talk about it? And you'd be surprised. I have dealt with so many CEO groups and production teams about there is something we can change. They didn't really realize the impact, and we can satisfy both. But the key thing is to come at it calm and to really understand that they probably have a valid point that you're not seeing. So make sure you open up for that. That was a long answer, but did that make sense?
It did. And I think it's good advice. And I'm sitting on the same side of the fence as you. I think if you try to just keep it to yourself, bottle it up, the more times it happens, the worse that gets. And eventually, the bottle of Coke is going to explode, isn't it? Inevitably. So yeah, I think for that reason, and for what you've just explained to us, I'm with you on that. I think you're right as well about, particularly when you're the employee, let's call it, trying to raise something with a boss or with a leader or management of the company. A lot of the time, they've not done it maliciously. They've not done it to annoy you. They probably don't even realize it is annoying you, or that you do have an issue, or that it is having any impact on you whatsoever. They've just thought about it in the terms of, well, if I do this, it'll make that aspect of the business work better. So I'm just going to do it and not think about it. And so if you don't raise it, they'll never know. And then the next person will have the same problem, and the next one, and the next one, and so on.
Yeah. And the issue there is, if you raise it, give enough time frame and enough energy to it being resolved. If it's not resolved, then you make the decision, can I work in this environment or not? So my advice to this person yesterday was, and if you take this job, don't go in, mad already, annoyed that they're not paying for your travel to the headquarters. Like that, you are not going to succeed there. They're going to feel that anger. They're going to know, and they have reasons for that. Maybe that's part of their remote thing. We're happy to be remote, but there is no office environment. So accept it or don't. And I in my later work, my work I'm doing now, I talk a lot about acceptance and letting go. And it's definitely a process. It doesn't just happen when you say, oh, I'm going to be okay with that. So that's where, once again, we have to really manage ourselves. What are the places I'm getting tripped up? I do want to accept that. You make the decision. I do want to accept that. I don't want to accept that. I don't want to accept that. Get your resume ready, get your keywords ready, start networking, and have an exit strategy. I do want to accept that. Okay, how do I desensitize myself to it? How do I focus on other things? I call this find a way in instead of out, because usually we talk ourselves into, once we're mad about something, to all the things we hate about it. And we try to get other people to co-sign that with us. Oh yeah, that's bad. Don't do that. Don't do that anymore. Say, I'm happy with this. I'm happy with that. This is not ideal, but I am accepting it because I like A, B, C, and D, or I understand their point of view and they have given it their best shot, which is why it's important to discuss it, or you can never let it go.
I've been there and done that, and I agree. It doesn't help. Doesn't help anyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who is the most annoying person you know?
Aside from my mother, which I don't know about you guys, but aside from my mother, it's definitely me, because I get in my own way. Talked about knowing your triggers, knowing yourself. And I say, I did it again and again. And now I'm like, I almost did it again. But it takes a while to I did it again and again and almost again, because until we see our reactions, as you did, in real time. So I am the most annoying person I know, because I keep on putting myself back with the same people, the same situations, the same clients that don't want to listen, which is actually how the book was born. I was coaching CEOs, and throughout the day, I'm like, you're not looking at your own behavior. My staff, my CEO. Yes, but what are you doing? But what are you doing? So I wrote the book just because next time someone wanted to say, I was like, read this, we're not having a session today. So I wrote it down so I didn't have to keep repeating myself. And they were like, oh, can you train my staff on this? Can we have it? So that's how the book came about, that I was trying to be efficient and create a system instead of this individual. As I told you yesterday, you have to manage your own behavior. Try this, schedule it differently. So I'm the most annoying person I know. I talk loud, I talk fast, I go at it. I mean, I'm in my 60s now, and I'm still, I talk fast. I have a lot of energy. And this is me in retirement almost. So, I'm definitely, I get in my own way and I can turn people off. So it's really been, an effort for me to find. And that's why I love the startup world and founders, because we work fast. We do things fast. I have another mantra. We go slow to go fast. But that cycle, that energy, the way people vibrate there really resonates with how I vibrate.
Quite a rare approach, I think, to a labour-saving device there is writing a book. I don't know many people who would have that as their... Did it work?
Well, it's worked for me. I think I've had about 1,000 copies out there now, which I'm proud of. And it does work. I train a lot of people on it, and there are a lot of approaches about how, and it really helped those people. Well, I'm not annoying. They're the annoying people. Read the book. It really, once again, when you have one finger pointing, when you're pointing the finger at somebody else, you got 3 back at you. So, it's really that turnaround that we talked about before, your first question, who's annoying, the person or the boss? What is it? And it always comes back to either I'm annoyed or I'm annoying someone else. So how do I manage myself? So yeah, the book's been a fun tool to look at that and to get people to see.
Pleased to hear it. And if they took a long, hard look at themselves and were really brutally honest about it, I think most of us would say the same answer as you've given. Maybe not the bit about their mothers, but they'd say, yeah, it's me. Yeah. The things in my life that have happened that have annoyed me the most were my own fault. I did those things. Unless they have a little brother. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, Philip. You're not listening anyway.
I don't have a little brother, so it's my mother. or as my daughter would say, my mother is the most annoying person I know. She's also the person I love the most. So, and I've learned the most from. So I think, but also, especially going into leadership and thinking about how you want to be, that point that it's always your responsibility. It's always up to you. I think that's the true twist and lesson of a true leader, that it doesn't matter what else happened. I have to take responsibility.
What would you say then is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned in your career so far?
I think it's that reactions speak louder than your actions. So we all have a plan. We're going to execute on the plan. We talk about it. We prep. We do our pitch. But something gets thrown at you, the unexpected plot twist, and we go off the rails. We get one of those nasty, annoying, whatever reactions. So that's the biggest lessons I've learned, that my reactions speak much, even if they're nonverbal, much more. They speak much more than actually all the good I do or the purposeful statements I put out or letters or whatever it is. Remember, when you're a leader, that reaction isn't just in the boardroom. It isn't just in a staff meeting. It's, in the elevator, on the Zoom, on the way to the meeting. You have eyes on you all the time, especially when you're a public official. So it's really about how you compose yourself. And once again, that doesn't mean that you don't have to get angry or you don't have to say what you mean. It's just how you display that, how you talk to people, how you talk about the situation. I'm not saying become, nothing's ever wrong, but it's who you direct it at and how your rants go and how you land them to be purposeful to move the work forward.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a leader, you're going to be in the fishbowl all the time, aren't you? I really like that, the reaction, not the action, because I think actions tend to be things you can control. And so there's usually been quite a bit of thought behind it before a leader will do something. Whereas a reaction is usually something that just happens and you don't really control it. And I think that's one of the reasons, isn't it? Because it's giving that immediate insight into how you really feel.
Exactly. And it's showing people who you really are.
Yeah, you can't hide from it. It's authenticity, whether you want it or not. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, that's probably a good thing. It's just, sometimes you've got to be careful, haven't you?
The other thing, if you want to get into it, is what I've learned is that you can't hide who you are. You cannot hide who you are. So if you're really all in and managing your team, they're going to know. Me, when the going gets rough, I make a joke. And I have a son-in-law who, when he first met me and I made a joke when something was bad, he thought, I was horrible. How could I joke about his flat tire stuck on the road, right? Doesn't he understand it was, don't I understand it was dangerous? But that's my response to stress. I like to take it down. But that's who I am. And there are people that know that and love that about me. Like, I'm going to take a moment that is horrific and somehow make a joke out of it. But that's going to change the temperature in the room. And then we're all going to be able to move forward. So you have to it's not about being perfect. It's about being the best version of yourself you can be so that you can show others. And that means your personality, your quirks, all of that can come across just in a way that you are making sure you're managing the output and how you do it and that you're doing it appropriately.
And you've got to laugh, though, because it's better than crying, isn't it?
100%. I always say, there I go again, you'll laugh, you'll cringe, you'll change.
Yeah, absolutely. So slightly opposite question then. What do you think is the biggest mistake that a leader can make?
I think it's not really showing up as who they are, being fake. I'm coming to terms with a leader that I worked with for 13 years. I was his number 2. We ran a huge organization. It was one of the largest in the city, 160 million. It was a social service agency, and he was beloved. And he was embezzling, and he went to prison. And, the biggest mistake you can make is not showing up. I look at it now, everybody loved him. This was Wall Street Journal, A1, New York Times News. He was so lovable and so great at what he did. I never even entertained the possibility that this could be going on. I never even entertained it. So I say, fool me once, shame on me, shame on you. He never showed who he was. He never showed who he was until that was found. So I think you have to really, show up as you are and really understand the fragile nature of being a CEO of the web of everything you're holding together. There's a reason you make 20 times, 40 times, 60 times the lowest salary in the organization, because you are making sure all those people have their jobs, have their employment, have a purpose in the office. So to portray that trust to me and, show up this way, and then we all find this out, I think it was some of the biggest shock of our life. And I look at it now and say, he was too perfect. And I'm like, that was my fault. He was too perfect. Everybody loved him. Everybody thought he was the go-to guy. Everybody used him for problems. So, it's really the biggest mistake a leader can take is by misleading his staff. Or I don't think anybody sets out to lie, cheat, and steal. But once they do it, step aside and don't ruin it for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, that's quite an extreme example, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, yeah. You see in a lot of these kind of the true crime shows and stories that you read about, it's quite often that the last person anyone would suspect are the ones who are doing the worst stuff. And it does make you wonder, like, is that because they're just naturally lovable, or are they working really hard at it behind the scenes and you don't really notice?
Yeah, I had a friend whose grandmother always said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them, don't listen to what they're saying, listen to what they do. And now, of course, 10 years later, looking back, I was like, there were some behaviors that maybe if I had thought about it, but I think the worst thing a leader can do is really not honor the job that they're trying to do. I really do think that is the worst thing they can do. They're really in it for the money, and it doesn't have to be that extreme of stealing and cheating, especially from a nonprofit. But the idea that, they're only in it for the money or the power or the prestige, they burn out quick, and they're not in it for the growth or the mission or doing what a leader's really supposed to do, which is elevate their staff and help everyone to grow. So I think if you're really not, the worst thing they can do is not honor their primary purpose. They can say, oh yeah, it's just about the profit or making this. No, it's really about helping everyone in the organization elevate.
I 100% agree. Definitely. I think, non-profit is a slightly different world, isn't it? But even in the for-profit, some of those things are still important, but only because they are the means to the end, which is, as you've said, elevating your people, looking after the team, making sure everyone is safe and happy as much as you possibly can, at least as far as it's within your control in a business setting. Caveats otherwise, I know. But yeah, I think you're right. And I've seen a few leaders myself as well who've been through exactly that pattern where they're there for the paycheck. Within a relatively short period of time, everyone knows that that's the case, and then you're losing people, you're losing engagement, your productivity's dropping, and then suddenly you're not making the profit anyway. Your own salary's at risk as a result, and it becomes just a self-fulfilling cycle, doesn't it?
Yes.
So, yeah, completely agree with you.
That makes me happy. But, we talked about this a little before. I'm learning to say some of the unpopular things. I'm learning, people say, micromanaging is the worst thing, or this or that. That's not the worst thing. Sometimes you need to micromanage. Some people deserve micromanagement, but some projects deserve micromanagement. But at the same time, it's really about not honoring the work. We all know that being a leader or a CEO is a gift. Not everyone makes it to that level. And you really have a trust, and you're really charged with, yes, the work and the business and making a difference in the world, but the people that work for you, they count on you for their financial independence, their livelihood. And to not honor that is a big mistake. Leadership
is a privilege. It's also a responsibility. It's a great job if you can get it, but you can't have that without the other two things. So what tips then would you offer to any leaders in the audience who may be struggling to resolve a conflict, either that they're involved in themselves, or maybe it's between colleagues or people they're managing, that has resulted from some of these annoying behaviors and triggers that we've been talking about?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is address it now with the right people. And the second thing is stay the course. A lot of people think that they have the conversation and the issue is resolved. In my experience, the issue is very rarely resolved. in one conversation. And it falls on us as a leader to make sure that we stay the course. If I say, I'm going to figure out my own reaction, I'm going to get more resources, I'm going to stop doing that, I'm going to hold the meeting differently, I have to step up to the plate and do it. And I'm full of mantras today, but one of my other mantras is just because it's not working doesn't mean it's not working. Stay the course, because as you change, people change, and it's slow. So talk about it, come up with, I like to say almost diplomatic solutions, right? Solutions that don't blow it up. Come up with those, agree to them, and then really follow through with them. Revisit it in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks. This is going better. This isn't. Adjust course. People think I've done it once. It's all about, I told them they were annoying. Shoo, that's behind me. That's just in front of you. That's the beginning. So manage it through that. So that I suggest that you actually talk to people that don't, what I say, co-sign your bullshit. People, I'm sorry, I'm cursing on your thing, but I say co-sign your BS, your blind spots, because there are people that you can call and say, yeah, I can't believe your boss does that. And then you get upset. But there are people that call like me and say, well, maybe there's a reason, or what are you contributing to that? So find people who actually help you get a wider view of the situation and understand what might be pushing your buttons. Get to know yourself better. So manage it, come up with a plan, get to know yourself better, and change your own behaviors so that you can get unstuck out of that. And if you can't do any of that and you really think it's non-viable, then you might want to call in a tiger team. You might really want to deal with an HR person or something bigger, or you might really say, this is not a fit for me. Because none of us, especially after COVID, we should have learned the lesson before, don't want to be stuck doing something we don't want to be doing. So be honest with yourself. I love the mission. I love the pay, but I don't really like the people there. Or I love the people there, but I don't know why I'm doing this job anymore. It doesn't suit for me. You have to really be honest with yourself. There's also, the final thing, which is sometimes, I think it was a song, there ain't no good guy, there ain't no bad guy. There's just you and me, and we both disagree. And you have to learn, and that is another skill of a leader. You have to learn to live with two truths that might not always mesh up together. You have to learn with, I always have trouble with this person, but I do respect that they get their job done. Or I do value their role in the company, even though we always fight. Or I don't like the way my boss does this, but I do like what I get from that. So holding two ideas that aren't exactly congruent and both make you feel good is a really nice growth place for a leader to be and an individual. So I really strive to help people. It's about accepting responsibility that we talked about. If you want to be a leader, accept that responsibility. This is on me. It's not on the other person. It's not on HR. It's not on the board of directors. This is on me. And then try to live with two ideas that you might not love, but you can accept.
Yeah, I love that. I think particularly your first point is applicable to so much of leadership, isn't it? We all fall into that trap occasionally, especially when it's a difficult conversation. Right, I've had the conversation, problem solved, I move on to the next thing. But actually, so much of leadership is actually about follow up and follow through, isn't it? And making sure that the conversation wasn't just a one flash in the pan and everyone's forgotten about it and the problem isn't solved, actually. It's going back and having regular check-ins and, as I said, following up, making sure that the solution is there and that it sticks. And you can't just do that with one conversation.
I agree. Revise.
Indeed. If you could go back in time and do one thing differently in your career, what would that thing be?
I wouldn't be annoying. No.
That's too easy.
I've had a really blessed career. I think the one thing I might do is be more truthful about what I really wanted. And once I started being successful in managing people, I got the next job. And I didn't really think about what is it really that I want to do. I was always invested in who hired me or what they wanted or sold on it. And it's not until, now, almost on the heels of, working for someone, like we talked about how to be slapped in the face, who lied and cheated and, I was collateral damage. damage that I really sat back and said, what do I want to do? And for the first 10 years after that, I consulted. All I really want to do, this turns into my pitch, all I want to do is speak. I like to motivate. I like to come in. I understand, a speech isn't just about I'm speaking at you. It's about we're stuck at a moment in time where we're having this issue or we need more about this. We don't have time to take a master's degree or a course. How can you get us all on the same page? A speech or the right speech can really help change an organization in real time. And that's really what I focus on now and what I want to be doing. So, because I think that it's the most way I can help people change their perception quickly.
Well, fair enough. And from what we've seen so far, I think you're pretty good at it as well. So.
Thank you.
Leadership Heroes.
Don't know how time's flown this fast, but we must have been enjoying ourselves. So last question, everyone gets this one. It's called Leadership Heroes. So the question is, if you had to pick one person, and they could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Well, I have to go to I can never say the word, the Kobayashi Maru. I have to rewrite the rules of that because there is a Star Trek story there. It definitely Jean-Luc Picard. I mean, I learned a lot from Captain Kirk, as I said, the roles, responsibilities, real time. Jean-Luc Picard was an incredible leader, taking his own emotional states, using them, bringing out the best in others in real time, looking for solutions. But I think what's most important about that Next Generation in Star Trek is the makeup on the bridge. That originally in Star Trek, we have Captain Kirk. When we get to Next Generation, TNG, we have the captain, the number 2, and the counselor. And I'm a social worker, and I believe that the counselor role really that's the social work role. It's where it's not just HR, it's emotional intelligence, it's training, it's personal, it's team interaction, it's all of those things. So I really believe that social work role in terms of leadership is important. So the reason I said I can never say that, the Kobayashi Maru. The reason I'm going out of the lines is I would have to say Jane Addams. Most people do not know Jane Addams. Do you know who she was? She was the founder of social work. She was a socialite who actually, was traveling around Chicago and saw homeless people and this and that and said, I want to help them. And she built something called Hull House, which is the first kind of community center model for people coming, and the founder of social work. So 120 years later, and fast forward to TNG, Next Generation, when you have the counselor. So I will go with Jane Addams, who has really started social reform and social work. And we're really, I would say now, especially after COVID, we're really seeing that role of the social worker and of how, we all watched, I don't know if we all watched it, we all watched Billions, where the psychologist is on team and how she works with people. But I think that founder, Jane Addams, of thinking about how we help community, to help people and organize people together to really get their best and get over hard times would be the leader I most admire.
I really like that. I was getting ready to say, sorry, someone's picked Picard before. We've had him loads of times. And just the last minute, you changed direction. And yeah, and a unique pick as well. We've definitely never had her before. I need to research her afterwards now. You've piqued my interest.
I love her also because she was a socialite. And in those days, she didn't have to do anything, right? She could have chose to dress nice and go to parties, but she chose. She does have a quote that most social workers, are raised on, which is, the good we secure for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secured for all of us and incorporated into our common life. And that's what we talked about in terms of a leader of a company too. It's not just your income package, your compensation, your lifestyle. It's everyone you're working with that you're trying to secure that for. So I love that train of thought. And I love that, that 120 years later, that model is growing stronger. Community centers, mental health, places where there are many professionals together to help you. It's really, really growing. It's first hitting its stride. So she was quite the visionary.
I do agree with you with a lot of what you say about Next Gen as well. I think Star Trek has always been ahead of its time by its nature. But if you look at it in the context of a workplace, they had a mental health expert, a counsellor, literally, as you say, sat on the bridge at the captain's left hand. Yeah. Back in the late 80s, and it was only maybe 5-10 years ago today that was actually the whole concept of mental health and looking after people in that way at work was even in the conversation. And it probably took COVID to give it a bit of a pick up the proverbial to actually happen.
Yeah, I think, we all know the story of Steve Jobs crediting Star Trek with most of the things computer play. So I think if he was still alive, that would have happened a lot sooner. He would have been, go to see your social worker, go see your counselor.
Yeah, very possibly. Although he was quite into the alternative medicine as well, wasn't he? So maybe. Yeah, not.
Well, I don't know. I'm just joking about it. But I'm just saying everything else that has really revolutionized our society, the cell phone, the communicator, the Alexa, the computer, play this, do that, the AI, the next thing on that show, as you said, in the workplace is really the central role of the counselor or the mental health component.
Who says sci-fi has no place in the world, eh?
I don't know them.
No, me neither. Yeah. Well, last thing then, Ilene, I'll ask you is if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you, perhaps get a copy of that book that you wrote or work with you even, where can they find more information?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Ilene, Ilene Marcus. You can also just Google Managing Annoying People. My book is on Amazon. It usually comes right up. It's a bright orange color. And I love to be linked in. I work with people to understand their needs and then craft a speech or a keynote or a series of workshops to help their teams perform, a new launch, a growth spurt, to really get everybody aligned to what their role is, how they communicate to each other, and how to make sure they're really reaching their noble purpose, I like to say, in their organization. They're really doing what they started to do. So I'd love to have those conversations. And, I can give you my email. It's my name, Ilene, at alignedworkplace.com. But if you Google Managing Annoying People, I usually come up pretty quick because I am annoying.
Surely not. Awesome. Well, I'll put a selection of those links in the show notes, the episode description, so everyone can find that very easily. Well, that's everything. Thank you again so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today.
Pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
Huge thanks again to Ilene today for sharing her wisdom, her experiences, and her thoughts on annoying people. Some very honest stories there. We're all extremely grateful to you, Ilene, for sharing that with us. If you are a new leader, new manager, first timer to leadership, and you are struggling with any or all or none of the problems that we've talked about today, if you are daunted by your new role, if you are not quite getting the traction that you want, then that is where the Integrity Leaders community can help. We have monthly live sessions. We have leadership training. We have one-to-one time with me as well, and a community of leaders at a similar stage in their career to you. Give you opportunity to find that tribe that will help you with the feedback, with the supportive ear, with the constructive criticism as well. Sign up today at www.leadernotaboss.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, listener. I hope you'll be back again next week for what will be the third episode in our International Women's Day celebration this month, when I'll be talking with tech founder Denzel Eden about her journey as a software engineer to a founder and why she is such a passionate demystifier of AI. I'll talk to you then, and in the meantime, try not to annoy your coworkers too much and be a leader, not a boss.